of us do with that information? For that, we look to our friend and colleague, NBC's Jacob Soboroff, who was on the front lines of covering this humanitarian crisis during the first Trump presidency, a reporting assignment that brought Jacob face to face with the children, the kids, who were ripped away from their families during Trump's first family separation crackdown.
I got home, I was home for a couple days, and it was at a kid's birthday party where I got another call from Katie Waldman saying, we're gonna let you into the epicenter of separations. And that place was called Ursula, the Central Processing Center in McAllen, Texas. I still remember that I was wearing a light blue button-down shirt. I had my notepad. That was the time where I saw what had been talked about and rumored in the media. Kids locked up in cages, sitting on these concrete or linoleum floors. They thought that showing the world separations through the eyes of people like me, they would scare the out of people that were attempting to come from coming and scare Congress into allowing them to have more strict immigration laws.
So you're a tool.
Bigly, as Donald Trump might say.
So, as Jacob reported, they thought showing this was the point. So showing the cruelty was also a tool. And the voice you heard there interviewing Jacob is filmmaker Errol Morris. He and Jacob Soboroff team up to turn Jacob's searing body of reporting on the family separation crisis into a new film called Separated. I was lucky enough to have Jacob and Errol Morris join me on this program to discuss what inspired them to make this film and the urgency of recording for posterity how unprecedented Trump's family separation policy was.
This represents something different and something new, and it's important to remember and acknowledge that fact. When you're separating a 2-month-old nursing infant from his mother, that's a big, big difference. You can hear the head of the Department of Homeland Security, the secretary, tell us that we're not doing anything unusual. We're just following the law. And why didn't they do this during the Obama administration? Obama deported lots and lots and lots of people. Why didn't they do this during the Obama administration? Because they discussed it and decided it was immoral.
Discussed it and decided it was immoral. That's what stops Obama and doesn't stop Trump. That's the dividing line. And it's possible that it incentivized them. So what happens now? Joining us to help answer that question, none other than Jacob Soboroff, NBC News political and national correspondent, the author of Separated, Inside an American Tragedy, the book on which the new film by Errol Morris, Separated, is based. And Lee Gallant is here, immigration rights lawyer with the ACLU. He argues the national class action challenge to the first Trump administration's family separation policy. Jacob, I start with you. The book and the film are all done without knowledge that Trump would be reelected. He has been. And I wonder if you can just start with what you think your body of reporting will be in a second term. What has been committed to on paper, the kinds of people that are in place, and what, with your knowledge and expertise, you expect them to do on the front of family separation.
First of all, Nicole, thank you so much for doing this special broadcast about this. You know, I think what a Republican-appointed judge called, George W. Bush-appointed judge, called one of the most shameful chapters in the history of our country. And I don't think that you can understand what will happen in a second Trump term unless you look back and what happened in the first. And plainly and simply, you mentioned those signs that we all saw at the Republican National Convention that I got to see myself in person from the floor there that said mass deportation now. And I think the baseline thing that everybody needs to understand and remember and sort of internalize is that mass deportation is family separation. It's just family separation by another name. It's not ripping children away from their parents at the border, but it is taking parents away from their children in their homes at their schools, in their communities, in a way that is just orders of magnitude larger than the 5,500 children who were deliberately taken away from their parents, according to the ACLU, to Ruhle11, who's sitting with you there, and are traumatized for life. Physicians for Human Rights said that this was torture, according to the UN definition of it. The American Academy of Pediatrics said it was government-sanctioned child abuse. And if we think about, and I hope one day all 5,500 of those children will be able to tell their story of what the Trump administration deliberately did to them, and to be really clear, what they deliberately did to them was harm them, was put them in the cages that you're seeing on your screen right now, for no other reason than to scare people from coming to this country because they had some of the most desperate situations on planet Earth, in order to basically, in a lot of cases, save their lives and certainly come here for a better one. None of this was an accident. As Adam Serwer coined in The Atlantic, the cruelty was the point, and now they're looking at essentially supersizing what they did in the first term in a second Trump administration.
Jacob, if you look at the sort of players on the board, and with your knowledge of where their ambitions, for lack of a better word, were stymied, what is your assessment of how capable this new team will be in carrying out mass deportations?
Both Errol Morris and I learned in the making of Separated and in reporting the book that during the first Trump term, they wanted to separate maybe as many as 20 or 30,000 children from their parents at the border if they were able to do so. And only because of the work of Ruhle11, of the ACLU, of immigration attorneys on the front line, who incidentally, by the way, are as important as any first responder. These are literally life-saving roles that these people are doing, looking out for children and parents that are falling through the cracks, really, of the immigration enforcement sort of apparatus. If it wasn't for them, it would have been far, far worse. And you've got Tom Homan, who Caitlin Dickerson says in her Pulitzer Prize-winning Atlantic cover story about family separation was the intellectual father of the family separation policy and was pushing for it as early as during the Obama administration. You've got Stephen Miller, who, as you'll hear in the movie, was calling to non-Senate confirmed political appointees, low-level people within the government, in order to sort of coordinate on the immigration enforcement priorities of the first Trump term. And when I say priorities, I mean ripping children apart from their parents. And the list goes on. You know, we don't sort of know the full staffing of all of these agencies, but there are many of them. The Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services. All of them had a hand in what became the family separation policy, and all of them will have a hand again in what happens to parents and children who have come to this country in the second Trump administration. And we're talking about literally hundreds of officials potentially that they'll have the ability to influence in this second term, who some of them may have been a part of the first one. Others were a part of the first one and tried to resist and may be thrown out of government in a second. All of that has yet to play out.
Lee, the film, this was something I had a chance to talk to both of you at a screening this week, and the film makes clear that even with what Trump perceives to be a mandate, and I think it's debatable whether that's what he actually has in a second term for what he's talking about here, he was stymied, as Jacob said, by Republican-appointed judges. Just talk about the legal hurdles facing him as he starts with this plan, as Jacob said, which is essentially family separation by another name.
Yeah, I think when people see really egregious stuff, whether it's judges who are looking at the legality or the public, I think they will push back. And I think you're absolutely right that whatever mandate he has on immigration may be to reform policies. We want reform of the policies, border policies, and more generally. But when you cross a line, the American public tends to say, well, wait, that's not what we meant. And that's what we saw in family separation. Yeah. We put the evidence before the judge, and he called the policy brutal, as Jacob said, a shameful period in our history. We educated him about the cases, and I think that's what the public learned, and they took to the streets peacefully, but took to the streets and said, not in our name. So we'll see what happens going forward. I mean, the legal hurdles on family separation, we now have an ironclad consent decree that says no more family separation. We'll see if the Trump administration tries to get around it. But as Jacob pointed out, out. There are other ways they can try and go about family separation on a mass scale and force these parents to decide, am I going to take my U.S. citizen child to a country they've never seen before or leave them behind? You know, and one thing the immigration laws do is they provide an enormous amount of discretion to the president. And if a president really wants to be harsh, they can be harsh. But in the past, both Democratic and Republican administrations have said, well, we don't need to tear families apart. We don't need to go after non-criminals who are working hard. And the Trump administration is coming in and saying, well, we're going to deport millions of people. We don't care if it's a grandmother. We don't care if they have U.S. citizen children. So I think the whole country is going to have to push back on that and say, wait, that's not what we meant.
You know, the first time he ran and won, he ran on building a wall.
Right.
Which doesn't put the family or the family member here illegally in the mind of the voter. I mean, to Jacob's reporting over the summer, people waved around mass deportations. It's an applause line at Trump and Vance rallies. How far in sort of the othering and the fear of the illegal immigrant or asylum seeker or worker, how far do you think we've traveled as a country between 16 and 24?
Yeah, I think that's the right question. You know, I do think we've traveled far. There is more anti-immigrant sentiment, and I'm depressed about that. I've been doing this 3 decades, and I think this is the worst I have seen, but I'm still hopeful that there are lines the American public will not let be crossed. And I think one of the things that the challenge for us is to talk about the human stories and not let this just be abstract principles or aggregate statistics. You know, what we saw during the first family separation period was just unconscionable. A little boy was taken away, a 4-year-old boy who had glasses, and they took him away, but they didn't let him get his glasses case. So all day long, all the mother was thinking about is, will they get him another pair of glasses if they break? Will they show him where he can put his glasses at night? You know, little 18-year-old little boy being stuffed in a car, and the mother could see him craning his little neck to see her as the car drove away without him. Just and even the families that are now reunited, little children just worrying about being taken away again in the middle of the night. We were just working with a 3-year-old boy who stands by the window every day to look to see if men are going to take him away again. I mean, that's what I hope the American public will realize. These are just not aggregate statistics. These are not abstract principles. There are real human lives. That doesn't mean we don't reform the system, but let's have some amount of humanity when we deal with it.
I mean, Jacob, it's unbearable to hear of what amounts to emotional torture of children in the name of, you know, U.S. immigration policy. I wonder what your hopes are for the impact of this film now on the eve of a second Trump presidency.
I think Lee said the operative word, Nicole, humanity. There's an amazing organization here in California that takes people down to the border called This Is About Humanity, so that they can see for themselves who's impacted by these policies. And I will never forget reporting with you. I'm having the chills just saying this right now. In that summer of 2018, those days between June 13th and June 20th, from the moment I walked into that 250,000 square foot former Walmart where they were holding over 1,000 boys who were there only because most of them had been taken away from their moms and dads when they crossed the border, or then when I went into the facility in McAllen, Texas, you showed the video earlier, children locked up in cages, laying on those linoleum floors under the Mylar blankets, in some cases supervised by security contractors in a watchtower. I have never seen anything like it, and I don't think the American public had ever been exposed to anything like that, certainly not to the